My name is Mallory Whitaker. I was 35 years old, and Thanksgiving was supposed to be the first peaceful evening I had spent with my family in years. Instead, my father raised his glass and announced, "We're selling the family business. A failure deserves nothing." My brother and sister cheered. My mother stared at her plate. I smiled and asked, "Dad, who's the buyer?" He leaned back like he had just won the argument of his life. "Everest Holdings. They're paying $50 million. What? I laughed. "This game is fun." The room went silent because every person at that table remembered who had taught me those words. My father's smile disappeared. Beside his plate sat the acquisition folder he believed guaranteed his victory. I knew the closing was scheduled for 8 the next morning. I also knew the money my siblings were already spending in their heads might never reach them. Before I tell you why I laughed, tell me where you're watching from and whether you would have stayed at that table or walked away. My father leaned toward me. "What do you know about Everest?" 11 years earlier, I still believed hard work could earn me a place in my own family. I was 24, newly finished with a graduate degree in systems assurance and working inside Whitaker Venue Technologies, the Columbus company my grandfather, Samuel Whitaker, had built from a 2-bay electrical shop. Samuel began by repairing scoreboards and theater controls. My father, Randall Whitaker, expanded the company into digital ticket gates, emergency wayfinding displays, and access systems used by convention centers and stadiums across the Midwest. My mother, Diane Whitaker, handled the family foundation and treated every company dinner like a ceremony honoring Randall. My older brother, Ethan, was vice president of sales and the publicly chosen successor. Snorts, he could charm a client through 3 rounds of golf, but he could not explain how our systems worked once the sales presentation ended. My younger sister, Brooke, had just finished law school and was already reviewing contracts for the company. She called herself practical. What she meant was that she protected whatever version of events benefited the family most. I worked in product security and reliability. It was not glamorous, but I understood the systems from the circuit boards to the software that controlled them. 6 weeks before our largest product launch, I found that a subcontractor had loaded the same encryption key into thousands of new access gateways. In simple terms, one compromised unit could expose every other unit shipped in that production run. The flaw could also force entire networks into a security lockout, disabling ticket gates and emergency displays until each device was manually reset. I tested it 3 times, documented every result, and presented a recommendation. Stop shipment for 10 days, replace the keys, and notify the affected clients before installation. Ethan refused before I finished the second slide. The launch quarter determined his bonus and supported a large renewal he had promised would close before year-end. He said no customer would ever discover the duplication. I told him reliability was not based on whether a customer discovered our mistake. Randall asked how much a delay would cost. I gave him the estimate. Ethan gave him a larger number that included speculative sales he had not yet booked. Randall closed my report and said, "Business is a game, Mallory. You understand systems, but you have never understood how to play." The units shipped. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Ethan walked through the office like my warning had become proof that I was overly cautious. Then, a convention center in Indianapolis experienced a network lockout during a national trade show. Ticket gates stalled. Digital directions disappeared, and temporary staff had to process thousands of visitors by hand. 2 days later, a sports complex in Kentucky suffered the same failure. A third client identified the duplicated keys during its own security review and suspended installation across 12 venues. Our largest national account canceled its expansion contract and demanded reimbursement for emergency labor, replacement hardware, and lost operating time. The original incident records showed that I had recommended the shipment pause. By the next board meeting, those records had changed. Ethan claimed the lockouts resulted from a security patch I had developed after production. Randall repeated the claim as though he had personally reviewed the code. Brooke prepared a timeline that placed my patch before the failures, even though the electronic log showed otherwise. When I brought printed test reports to the meeting, Randall would not let me distribute them. He said arguing with leadership proved I lacked judgment. Vanessa Cole, the company controller, was the only person who asked why the meeting minutes did not match the financial reserve request she had received weeks earlier. She had seen Ethan's bonus forecast and the emergency warranty account. She also noticed that a vendor tied to the faulty gateways had received an accelerated payment on the same day my report was closed. Randall told her the accounting department had no authority to question product decisions. My termination meeting lasted 14 minutes. Brooke placed the documents in front of me. Ethan did not attend. Randall told me the company needed stability after the loss I had caused. Diane sat beside him and said nothing until I refused to sign a statement accepting responsibility. Then she said, "Your father is trying to leave you a path back. Don't make this uglier." It became uglier without my help. Brooke amended the family trust so I would receive no future ownership distribution. Diane signed as co-trustee. Ethan was promoted for stabilizing client relationships after the crisis. Local suppliers heard that I had introduced a reckless software change and refused to follow instructions. 2 employers withdrew interviews after speaking with Randall. Vanessa kept copies of the original reserve requests, but she had 2 children in college and could not risk her job by confronting the board alone. 6 months later, she was pushed out after refusing to approve a set of revised meeting minutes. I left Columbus with less than $9,000, a used sedan, and a professional reputation my family had damaged before I understood how completely they had planned it. As I drove north toward Minneapolis, my phone lit up with a voicemail from Randall. I did not answer. His message played through the car speakers anyway. "Do not come back until you can admit what you cost this family." By the following spring, Minneapolis had taught me that failure and blame were not the same thing. My first job there was not impressive. Northline Continuity Group hired me as a junior incident analyst because its director cared more about my technical tests than the story attached to my last name. I worked nights documenting system outages for hospitals, transit contractors, entertainment venues, and regional banks. When a client lost access to a critical platform, my job was to determine what had actually failed, what could be restored, and which executive decisions had made the damage worse. I learned to read insurance policies, vendor agreements, debt covenants, and board minutes with the same attention I once gave software logs. My first major assignment involved a ticketing company that had suffered a ransomware attack just before the summer concert. The finance team wanted to shut down half its operations. The technology team wanted unlimited money and no oversight. I mapped the systems that generated cash, separated them from non-essential platforms, and helped design a staged recovery that kept payroll moving and protected more than 400 jobs. That project changed my career. I was promoted into operational resilience, then sent to companies where a technical problem had become a financial emergency. I learned that distressed businesses rarely failed because of one bad machine or one bad quarter. They failed because powerful people hid small truths until those truths became expensive. Everest Holdings noticed me during the turnaround of a venue services company in Milwaukee. Everest was not a mysterious corporation with a single owner sitting behind a giant desk. Snorts, it was a private investment group with an independent board, outside lenders, operating partners, and strict conflict rules. They recruited me as a director of technology risk. 5 years later, I became a partner. By 34, I was one of 3 managing partners and chaired the integration committee that decided how acquired companies would be governed after closing. I never hid my name. My biography appeared on Everest's website. I spoke at industry conferences, signed public announcements, and testified before an insurance panel about operational cybersecurity. My family simply never looked. Randall occasionally sent a birthday text asking whether I was still doing computer consulting. Ethan told relatives I moved from job to job because I could not handle a real company. Brooke contacted me twice for unpaid advice about data retention rules, then stopped responding when I asked her to send an engagement letter. Diane mailed holiday cards addressed to Mallory, Minneapolis. Even after I had moved to Boston to join Everest's executive office, while my career grew, Whitaker Venue Technologies weakened. The company survived the access gateway crisis, but it never repaired the culture that caused it. Ethan kept winning contracts by promising prices and deadlines the operations team could not meet. Randall borrowed against company property to fund expansion into custom arena displays. Brooke became general counsel and approved contracts that shifted too much risk back onto the company. Warranty claims increased. Experienced engineers left. The business still looked successful from the outside because the Whitaker name appeared on projects throughout Ohio, but the debt underneath that image grew every year. In early 2025, an Everest analyst placed Whitaker Venue Technologies on a list of possible acquisitions. I recognized the company before the analyst finished the first page. I disclosed my family relationship in writing, gave the board the full history of my termination, and removed myself from the initial valuation and offer votes. An independent team reviewed the books, toured the Columbus facility, interviewed customers, and concluded that the core business could survive under different leadership. The company still had skilled employees, valuable service contracts, and a strong installed base. What it lacked was cash, discipline, and honest governance. Everest approved negotiations. I agreed to participate in integration planning only after the board accepted two conditions. The Columbus facility would remain open, and ordinary employees would not lose jobs merely to increase the purchase return. I wanted accountability, but I would not use hundreds of workers as weapons in a family dispute. The deeper review began after Randall accepted a non-binding offer. That was when Vanessa Cole contacted Everest's outside counsel. She had followed the company from a distance and still possessed copies of the records she preserved after being forced out. Her files did not prove one isolated mistake. They showed a pattern. Vendor payments had been routed through a consulting company connected to Ethan. Brooke had built personal estate work to the corporate legal budget. Diane's foundation had received company-funded event services without proper reimbursement. Several board minutes had been revised after the meetings they supposedly documented. Everest's auditors compared Vanessa's records with current accounts. The discrepancies were serious enough to threaten executive retention payments, but not serious enough to destroy the acquisition. Randall never asked who had authority over integration after closing. He cared about the headline number and the prestige of saying a national investment firm wanted what he had built. A week before Thanksgiving, an ivory envelope arrived at my Boston apartment. Inside was a formal invitation to the Whitaker house in Upper Arlington. Diane had added one handwritten sentence beneath the printed menu. "Your father has important news. Try not to make the evening about yourself." I booked a morning flight to Columbus and forwarded a photograph of the note to Vanessa. She replied with 3 words, "They still don't know." 2 days before Thanksgiving, I returned to the house where my family had rewritten my past. Upper Arlington looked exactly as I remembered it. Wide lawns, brick homes, and neighbors who knew which families had money, but not how they treated one another behind closed doors. I arrived in a navy coat, plain boots, and the same practical watch I had owned for 6 years. I had left my company car in Boston and rented a compact sedan at the airport. Diane opened the door, looked at the car, and asked whether consulting firms still covered health insurance. Randall was in his study taking calls. Ethan stood at the kitchen island describing the lake house he planned to buy after the sale. He was 38 now, broader through the shoulders, and even more certain that confidence could replace competence. Brooke, 33, had spread legal documents across the dining room sideboard. She told me she had negotiated executive protections that would keep Ethan as chief operating officer and place her in charge of legal affairs after the acquisition. "The buyer knows who made the company valuable," she said. I asked the buyer's name. Ethan laughed and told me Randall wanted to make the announcement himself. Diane said I should let him enjoy his moment because he had spent years repairing the damage I caused. No one asked about my work. No one asked where I lived. They had already decided that the absence of visible luxury proved the life they imagined for me was real. Their arrogance made observation easy. Randall left an acquisition binder beside his chair whenever he took a call. I did not touch it, but the open tabs were visible from across the room. One section contained executive retention schedules Everest had never approved. Another listed a consulting payment to an entity I recognized from the audit team's preliminary report. Brooke had also prepared side letters promising herself a 3-year legal services agreement and Ethan a large change of control bonus, even though neither document appeared in the official data room. My phone vibrated while Diane criticized the cut of my sweater. Vanessa's message was short. Auditors confirmed vendor trail. Ethan connection documented. A second message followed from Everest's outside counsel. Brooke's personal estate planning work had been charged to Whitaker Venue Technologies through vague monthly invoices. The amounts were not enormous, but concealment mattered because she had certified the disclosures as complete. At lunch, Diane mentioned the family trust. She said the sale would finally allow Randall and her to enjoy retirement without worrying about ungrateful children making claims. I asked what that meant. She answered without hesitation. 11 years earlier, she and Randall had amended the trust to remove me from any distribution connected to the company. Brooke had drafted the language. Diane said it was necessary because rewarding me after the access system loss would have insulted Ethan's loyalty. For a moment, I felt the old pressure to prove what really happened. I could have shown them the board disclosures with my name on them. I could have opened Everest's website on my phone. I could have told Diane that the person she considered too unsuccessful to inherit anything had helped approve the plan, keeping nearly 300 Columbus employees at work. Instead, I asked whether she wanted help setting the table. By Thanksgiving afternoon, the house had filled with relatives who knew only Randall's version of the past. Snorts Ethan described the acquisition as recognition of his leadership. Brooke said the buyer would rely on her because investment firms feared regulatory mistakes. Diane outlined plans for the Whitaker Civic Innovation Foundation, which she intended to fund with her share of the sale. Randall moved from guest to guest, repeating that $50 million proved every difficult decision he had made was correct. At dinner, Ethan calculated what his expected payment could become if invested well, then admitted he planned to spend part of it on a boat. Brooke discussed opening a private law practice with Whitaker Money and Everest as her first client. Diane wanted the foundation to purchase a downtown office with her name engraved in the lobby. Randall waited until dessert arrived, enjoying every prediction as though the funds had already cleared. I watched him tap a spoon against his glass. Conversation stopped. He rose, adjusted his jacket, and looked directly at me before beginning the announcement he had rehearsed for the person he still believed had no power in the room. When the silence finally broke, Ethan was still smiling, but Randall was no longer looking at him. He repeated his question. "What do you know about Everest?" I glanced at the folder beside his plate enough to know the number on the cover is not the number anyone at this table is receiving. Brooke narrowed her eyes and asked how I had seen confidential material. I told her I had not needed to read her copy. I already had the approved version. Randall ordered me to stop speaking in riddles, so I reminded him of the day he fired me and the lesson he had delivered as though it were wisdom. Business was a game. I understood systems, but not how to play. You were wrong about one part. I said I learned the game. I just stopped playing on your team. I told them I was a managing partner at Everest Holdings. I chaired the integration committee responsible for approving post-acquisition leadership, operational controls, and executive retention. The name meant nothing to Diane at first. Ethan accused me of inventing a title. Brooke reached for her phone. By the time she found my public biography, Randall's face had changed. He said I had hidden a conflict and threatened to report me to Everest's board. I explained that the board had known about the relationship before the first valuation. I had disclosed my termination, the trust amendment, the original product security dispute, and every personal contact with the family. I had recused myself from the initial valuation and offer votes. Independent advisors set the price. Outside lenders reviewed it. Everest's Ethics Committee approved my later participation only because I would not benefit personally from reducing the family's proceeds. The conflict was disclosed. I said, "You just never researched the people buying your company." Ethan insisted I had manipulated the deal to punish him. I asked whether he believed I had manipulated the company's secured debt, warranty reserve, overdue supplier balances, or declining renewal rate. $50 million was enterprise value, not a suitcase of cash. From that amount, the company had to satisfy bank debt, transaction fees, unpaid obligations, and a warranty escrow. Several million more depended on customer retention and clean executive certifications. The family might still receive substantial money, but nowhere near the amount they had been dividing over dessert. Brooke said she would challenge the sale. I asked whether she wanted independent counsel to examine the side letter she had drafted, but failed to upload to the official data room. Her hand stopped above her phone. I described the 3-year legal agreement she had promised herself and the change of control bonus she had written for Ethan. Neither had been approved by Everest, the lenders, or the independent directors. Her certificate stated that no undisclosed executive agreements existed. Diane asked what any of that had to do with the family trust. I said the attempted pre-closing distributions were under review because the trust had received company-funded benefits, and because certain transfers appeared designed to move proceeds before warranty and creditor claims were settled. The money was not automatically gone, but it could remain frozen until the review ended. Ethan stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. He demanded to know what Vanessa had told us. That was the first moment Randall looked at his son instead of me. Ethan realized his mistake and claimed he meant a different Vanessa. No one believed him. I explained that the auditors had documented payments from a gateway supplier to a consulting entity associated with Ethan. His retention package could be canceled for misconduct. Brooke's legal services arrangement could be rejected. Diane's foundation reimbursements could be deducted. None of those decisions had been made by me alone, and none would disappear because the people affected disliked who had discovered them. Randall slammed his palm on the table and announced the transaction was canceled. I told him the board had already signed the definitive agreement. The company's lenders had extended forbearance based on a closing scheduled for 8 the next morning. Walking away could trigger immediate enforcement, a cash freeze, and a court-supervised restructuring. He was free to recommend cancellation, but the independent directors had a duty to consider nearly 300 employees, secured creditors and customers, not only the Whitaker family. He said the company belonged to him. I reminded him that control financed by debt was not the same as absolute ownership. He said Everest could not enter the building without his consent. I told him the board and lenders had already arranged access. He accused me of humiliating him in his own house. I said I had asked one question. Everything that followed came from facts he had chosen not to learn. Then he gave me the choice he believed would restore his authority. I could stand with my family and stop the acquisition, or I could return to Boston as their enemy. Diane whispered that I should think carefully because some decisions could never be undone. Brooke said blood would matter long after a job disappeared. Ethan called me a bitter employee using strangers to steal what he had earned. I pushed back my chair. That is not a real choice. Protecting the company does not require protecting your lies. Randall told me that if I walked out, I would never be welcome again. I picked up my coat. You removed me from this family 11 years ago. Tomorrow, I am removing you from the company. Behind me, chairs scraped, Diane called my name, and Brooke began dialing outside counsel. Randall was already shouting instructions into his phone when I closed the front door. At 8 the next morning, the conference room was already full when Randall arrived without his personal attorneys. They had reviewed the signed agreement overnight and refused to support his claim that he could cancel it by declaration. Everest's representatives sat on one side of the table with outside counsel, lender advisors, and the integration team. Whitaker Venue Technologies' independent directors sat on the other. I did not sit beside my father. I took the chair assigned to Everest. Randall opened by calling the acquisition a fraud engineered by a disloyal daughter. The lead independent director stopped him and said the board had received my conflict disclosure months earlier. The valuation had been completed without my vote. The company could not meet its debt obligations independently, and its primary lender would not extend further credit without the transaction. Rejecting the deal would not return the company to the day before Thanksgiving. It would place the business into an immediate restructuring with no guarantee the Columbus facility survived. Vanessa entered with outside counsel and an evidence binder. Ethan objected to her presence, which only confirmed that he knew exactly who she was. The auditors presented bank records showing that a supplier had paid a consulting entity controlled by one of Ethan's longtime friends. That entity had then covered Ethan's club dues, a vehicle lease, and renovations to a vacation property. Ethan denied directing the payments, but his messages discussed marketing support and asked the supplier to avoid using his name on invoices. He was placed on administrative leave before noon and terminated for cause after a separate investigation. His retention payment was canceled. Months later, he signed a civil repayment agreement rather than continue an expensive dispute he was unlikely to win. He sold the boat he already owned and part of an investment property to fund the settlement. He was not ruined, but he no longer had a company title protecting him from the consequences of his own record. S. Brooks' side letters were rejected immediately. Everest's counsel referred her incomplete disclosures and conflict handling for professional review. She lost her general counsel role and was required to reimburse personal legal expenses billed through the company. She insisted the entries were bookkeeping mistakes, but the descriptions matched work performed for Diane and Randall's estate plan. Her license was not magically erased in a day, but her corporate reputation suffered, and the clients she expected to follow her into private practice did not appear. Diane's proposed trust distributions were frozen until the closing review determined which expenses and transfers belonged to the company. Her foundation reimbursed event services, staff time, and technology that had been provided without proper approval. She cried in the hallway and asked me whether I understood what I was doing to my mother. I told her the auditors were reviewing documents she had signed. I was not the author of those documents. Randall made one last attempt to threaten the board. The lender representative placed 2 folders in front of him. One contained the closing documents. The other outlined the first steps of court-supervised restructuring if he refused. Randall read both. For the first time in my life, he faced a choice that could not be altered by changing the minutes afterward. He signed. After debt, fees, warranty, escrow, reimbursements, and unresolved claims, the family received substantially less than it had expected. The amount still left Randall and Diane financially secure, but it did not support the empire they had described at dinner. Ethan and Brooke received no guaranteed executive windfalls. Randall asked for a chairman position, a permanent office, and authority over customer relationships. The board rejected all 3. He received a limited 90-day transition assignment covering historical client records with no signing authority and no staff reporting to him. My first integration order kept the Columbus facility open. We protected wages, health coverage, and accrued vacation. We canceled unnecessary executive perks before cutting one production or support position. Engineers who had been ignored were invited to document unresolved risks. Customer service teams received authority to settle smaller warranty claims without waiting for an executive favor. The people who had spent years cleaning up leadership's promises were finally allowed to describe the real condition of the company. Randall, Ethan, and Brooke sent letters accusing me of conspiracy, breach of duty, and personal revenge. Their lawyers requested the valuation record, conflict disclosures, and board minutes. After reviewing them, those same lawyers quietly advised that the acquisition had been properly approved. The threats became emotional messages instead. Randall said, "I had stolen Samuel Whitaker's legacy." Diane said no business decision justified breaking a mother's heart. Ethan promised everyone would eventually learn what I had done. Brooke warned that I would regret making family matters public. My attorney sent one response. All future communication had to concern outstanding legal matters and pass through counsel. I blocked their personal numbers before the plane left Columbus. 9 months later, the company had survived everything my family had nearly done to it. We replaced the duplicated key architecture, created an independent product risk office, and cleared the warranty backlog that executives had hidden behind optimistic forecasts. 2 former customers returned after watching us publish a transparent security standard and honor old service commitments. By the end of summer, Whitaker Venue Technologies had its strongest renewal quarter in 4 years. The recovery belonged to the employees who stayed when leadership treated them as replaceable. I approved performance bonuses for production, engineering, installation, and customer support teams before any integration executive received one. At the first all-staff meeting, a technician who had worked there since Samuel's time told me it was the first bonus he had received that did not depend on an executive hitting a private target. Ethan never returned to executive management. He found a regional sales position at a smaller company and continued making settlement payments. Brooke lost her corporate role and faced ongoing professional consequences from her disclosure failures. She blamed me publicly until her own attorney advised her to stop discussing the matter. Randall and Diane sold the Upper Arlington house because the windfall they expected never arrived, and the company no longer paid for staff, events, vehicles, or foundation support. They bought a smaller condominium and remained comfortable. What they lost was not food or shelter. They lost the lifestyle and social influence they had funded through a business they treated like a private account. Randall sent letters asking for a confidential meeting where he could explain the pressure he had been under. Diane sent cards saying a daughter should eventually forgive her parents. Extended relatives forwarded invitations and warned me that refusing Thanksgiving dinner would make the separation permanent. I returned every letter unopened and declined every invitation. I did not need another meeting to learn whether they regretted hurting me or merely regretted the outcome. In October, Everest's board approved a new name, Everest Venue Systems. The change was not designed to erase Samuel's work. His original patents and company history remained in the archive, but a family surname could no longer function as a substitute for standards, controls, and accountability. On the first anniversary of the acquisition, security called while I was reviewing the final rebranding documents. Randall had arrived uninvited carrying Samuel's original brass company plaque. He said he needed 5 minutes to set the record straight and wanted to present the plaque to me personally through the security camera. I watched him stand in the lobby where employees once lowered their voices whenever he passed. I told security not to bring him upstairs. They could return the plaque to him or accept it for the historical archive if he signed a release, but I would not meet him. Randall chose to keep it. Before leaving, he told the receptionist I had no respect for family history. She did not argue. She simply held the door. That afternoon, I signed the rebranding authorization. The Whitaker name disappeared from the building the following week, not because I wanted to pretend the family never existed, but because the company's future could no longer depend on their version of the past. Thanksgiving 2026 was held in a private room at a small Columbus restaurant. Vanessa came with her husband. Several employees who had no nearby relatives joined us along with two Everest colleagues who had spent the year rebuilding the company. No one raised a glass to my family's losses. We talked about reopened contracts, apprentices entering the technical program, and the employees who would receive their first profit-sharing checks in January. For years, I thought revenge would feel like watching the people who rejected me lose everything. It did not. Randall and Diane still had a home. Ethan still had work. Brooke still had choices. Their lives continued without the power they once used to control mine. That was enough. Being related did not erase what they chose to do. Forgiveness was optional. Accountability was not. And their approval was no longer the price of my future. We appreciate your time and attention today. This fictional story was created only for educational and storytelling purposes. We Hobbits reminds you that if someone only notices your value after you stop giving. The problem was never your worth but their entitlement. You deserve relationships where your presence is appreciated before your absence becomes inconvenient.